The Great Hall of the Galaxy Council stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. Floating platforms held delegates from 847 different species, each one representing billions of lives across thousands of worlds. Light from distant stars filtered through crystal walls, casting rainbow patterns across the assembled beings. This was the heart of galactic civilization, the place where the fate of the universe was decided. Ambassador Daniel Hughes stood at the central podium, a small figure among giants. The Volanthi delegates towered above him, their scaled bodies shimmering with colors that changed based on their moods. The Karathi floated in their gravity bubbles, their tentacles wrapped around translation devices. The Dranathi sat in their armored shells. Watching with compound eyes that missed nothing, Daniel had served as Earth's voice in this chamber for 15 years. He had learned to read the body language of species that had no bodies as humans understood them. He had negotiated treaties with beings who thought in ways no human mind could fully grasp. He had done everything asked of him, and more. Today, he would do something no human had ever done before. 300 years ago, Daniel began, his voice carried by translation systems to every corner of the vast chamber. Humanity received an invitation to join the Galaxy Council. We were young then. We had barely reached our nearest stars. We looked up at the galaxy and saw wonder. We saw potential friends. We saw a family waiting to welcome us. The chamber was silent. This was unusual. Normally, delegates talked among themselves during human speeches, treating Earth's words as background noise, barely worth acknowledging. We were wrong, Daniel continued. We found not a family, but masters seeking servants. We found not friends, but users seeking tools. Rumors began spreading through the platforms. The Volanthi High Speaker, a being named the Zarek, who had held his position for 2 centuries, raised one of his 4 arms in a gesture demanding silence. Daniel ignored him. In 300 years, human doctors have cured plagues on 412 worlds. We asked for nothing in return. Human engineers have built infrastructure for species that could not build it themselves. We asked for nothing in return. Human soldiers have died defending council borders from external threats. We asked for nothing in return. Paused, letting his words sink in. Do you know what we received? Contempt, dismissal. We were called the servant species. We were told that young races must prove their worth. We proved it again, and still you look down on us. The Karathi delegate, a being called Vorath, waved his tentacles in what might have been agreement or might have been irritation. Ambassador Hughes, these complaints have been heard before. The Council acknowledges humanity's contributions. Perhaps we could discuss increased trade quotas. No, Daniel said. The single word cut through the chamber like a blade. No. The Sarek's scales shifted to a deep red, indicating surprise or anger. You refuse even to discuss terms. Daniel reached up and removed the golden pin from his collar. It was small, barely the size of a human thumbnail, but it represented everything. 300 years of membership, 300 years of service, 300 years of hoping that tomorrow would be different. He placed it on the podium. Earth formally withdraws from the Galaxy Council. All treaties are terminated. All trade agreements are canceled. All mutual defense pacts are void. Effective immediately. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. The delegates simply stared, unable to process what they had heard. Then chaos erupted. The Karathi delegates screamed that this was illegal. It's impossible. That no species had ever left the council. The Dranathi demanded to know if this was some kind of negotiating tactic, a bluff to gain better terms. The Volanthi High Speaker's scales cycled through colors so rapidly that the translation systems could not keep up with his emotional state. Daniel walked away from the podium. His aide, a young woman named Katie Morrison, fell into step beside him. She had been with him for only 2 years, but she had proven herself capable and loyal. More importantly, she believed in what they were doing. Sir Katie whispered as they walked toward the exit. They're following us. Daniel did not look back. Let them follow. They cannot stop us. There is no law against leaving because they never imagined anyone would want to. What happens now? Now we go home. and the galaxy learns what it means to lose humanity. Their ship, the Constellation, waited in the diplomatic docking bay. It was small by galactic standards, barely 200 meters long, but it was fast and well-armed. Human ships always were. That was another thing the Council had never quite noticed. They saw human vessels helping with construction projects and delivering medical supplies. They never wondered what those ships might be capable of if used for other purposes, Captain. Samuel Drake met them at the airlock. He was a tall man with gray hair and steady hands, a veteran of 40 years in Earth's space fleet. Ambassador, we've received confirmation from Earth. Project Homecoming is active. Daniel nodded. How long until full withdrawal? 48 hours for most personnel. Some of the deep space operations will take longer. Maybe a week. Make it happen. As the Constellation pulled away from Valanthos Prime, Daniel stood at the observation window and watched the station shrink into the distance. Behind him, communication channels exploded with desperate calls. The Council was demanding he return. They were threatening sanctions. They were offering concessions. They were doing everything except the one thing that might have made a difference. They were not apologizing. Back on Earth, President Laura Bennett stood before cameras that broadcast her image to every human world and station across the galaxy. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She had served in the fleet during the border wars, had watched human soldiers die defending Karathi colonies, while Karathi's ships stayed safely behind the lines. My fellow humans, Laura said. Today, we have taken a step that many thought impossible. We have left the Galaxy Council. We have ended 3 centuries of unequal partnership. We have chosen to stand alone. She paused, looking directly into the camera. I know many of you are afraid. The galaxy is vast, and we are small. But let me tell you something that the Council never understood. Our strength was never in our numbers. Our strength was never in our technology, though it exceeds theirs in ways they never suspected. Our strength is in our unity. Our strength is in our determination. Our strength is in our refusal to accept injustice. Across human space, people gathered around screens to watch. On colony worlds and space stations, in ships traveling between stars and in homes on Earth itself, they listened. Project Homecoming has begun, Laura continued. Every human doctor, every human engineer, every human soldier stationed in Council space is coming home. We will no longer give our labor, our genius, or our lives to those who despise us. We will no longer ask for respect that is never given. We will build our own future on our own terms. She straightened her shoulders. The galaxy called us servants. They were wrong. We were never their servants. We were their foundation. And now that foundation is gone, let them learn to stand on their own. Within hours, the withdrawal began. Human medical teams packed their equipment and boarded transports. Human engineers shut down projects they had worked on for years and walked away. Human peacekeepers handed over their stations to confused Council replacements who had no idea how anything worked. The galaxy had taken humanity for granted. They were about to discover how grave a mistake that had been. 6 months passed like a slow-moving storm across the galaxy. At first, the Council species told themselves that everything would be fine. They had managed before humans arrived. They would manage again. Humanity was useful, yes, but not essential. They were wrong. On the agricultural world of Thesan 4, the first signs of disaster appeared in the northern growing regions. The Thesoni were a peaceful species, devoted to farming and food production. They had fed dozens of worlds for centuries using vast irrigation systems that stretched across entire continents. Those systems had been designed and built by human engineers. Chief Agricultural Minister Voroth stood at the edge of a dying field. The crops that should have been tall and green were brown and withered. The irrigation channels that should have carried water were dry and cracked. Warning lights blinked on control panels that no Thesoni knew how to read. What happened? Vorath asked his assistant, a young Thesani named Kel. Kel's tentacles curled in a gesture of helplessness. The automated systems require regular maintenance. The humans perform this maintenance every 30 days. Without it, the pumps fail. Without the pumps, the water does not flow. Without the water, you did not need to finish. The dying fields spoke for themselves. Vorath immediately sent a message to Earth, offering trade concessions and formal apologies. The response came within minutes. An automated message thanking him for his communication and informing him that Earth was not accepting contact from former council members at this time. He sent another message, and another. Each time, he received the same polite, empty response. The food shortages began 3 weeks later. Worlds that had depended on the Sani grain found their supplies cut off. Prices rose. Rationing began. In the poorer districts of 100 planets, people started to go hungry. Commander Gregory Barnes watched all of this from the bridge of his ship, the Starward Hope. His vessel patrolled the border between human space and Council territory, part of a defensive line that stretched across dozens of light years. His job was simple: keep everyone out. Lieutenant Patricia Cole, his second-in-command, reported the latest border incident. "Another Council ship approaching, sir. Volanthi diplomatic cruiser. They're requesting permission to enter human space." Gregory studied the sensor readings. The ship was large and expensive, the kind of vessel that carried important people. 6 months ago, he would have granted permission without hesitation. The Volanthi had been allies, after all. Partners, friends, or so humanity had believed. "Deny the request," Gregory said. Patricia hesitated. "Sir, they claim to be carrying emergency medical supplies for one of their colony worlds. They say they need to pass through our space to reach it in time. Then they should have thought about that before they spent 3 centuries treating us like servants." Gregory's voice was flat and hard. "Send the standard warning. If they cross the border, we disable their engines and tow them back." The Volanthi ship stopped at the edge of human space. For nearly an hour it sat there, its crew apparently unable to believe that they were actually being refused. Then, slowly it turned and went back the way it had come. Patricia watched it go with troubled eyes. Some of those medical supplies might have saved lives. Gregory nodded. Yes, they might have. But how many human lives were lost defending Volanthi colonies while their own fleets stayed safe? How many human doctors died treating Volanthi plagues while our requests for help with our own diseases were ignored? He turned to face her. "I don't enjoy this, Lieutenant, but they made the rules. We're just playing by them now." On the Karathi homeworld, the situation grew worse by the day. The great cities of Korath Prime depended on fusion reactors for power. Those reactors were human technology, installed as a gift 2 centuries ago when the Karathi's own power systems failed. Human engineers had maintained them ever since. Without maintenance, the reactors began to falter. Power became unreliable. The floating platforms that made up most of Karathi cities started losing altitude. Emergency systems kicked in, but they were designed for brief outages, not prolonged failure. Prime Minister Sethrock called an emergency session of his government. The meeting took place in a building that was slowly sinking toward the acid seas below. "Its anti-gravity generators running on backup power. You must find a solution," Sethrock said, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. "Our engineers are studying the human systems, but the technology is beyond our understanding. They designed it to be simple to operate, but impossible to repair without their help." One of his advisors, an elderly Karathi named Vesik, spoke up. "Perhaps we should have treated them better. Perhaps we should have shared our knowledge with them as they shared theirs with us." "That is not helpful," Sethrock snapped. "We need solutions, not regrets." But regrets were all they had. The Karathi had been among the loudest voices, calling humanity primitive and unworthy of full council membership. They had voted against human proposals again and again. They had taken human help while giving nothing in return. Now the bills were coming due across the galaxy. Similar scenes played out. The Dranathi discovered that their military communication network, which they had believed was their own design, actually depended on human-created software that required regular updates. Without those updates, encryption protocols began failing. Secure channels became insecure. Military secrets started leaking. The Volanthi learned that the medicine they used to treat their most common diseases had been developed in human laboratories. They had the formula, but they lacked the specialized equipment to manufacture it. That equipment had been human-made. No one knew how to build more species that had never directly mistreated humanity, found themselves suffering anyway. The trade networks that connected the galaxy had been designed around human shipping lanes and human logistics. With humanity gone, those networks collapsed. Goods that should have taken days to deliver now took weeks or months, if they arrived at all. In the great chamber of the Galaxy Council, emergency sessions became daily events. The delegates screamed at each other, blamed each other, demanded that someone do something. But what could they do? They could not force humanity to return. They had tried diplomacy, and humanity had refused to respond. They had nothing to offer that humanity needed. The Volanthi High Speaker Thessarak proposed a military solution. Gather a fleet, he argued. Show humanity that the Council would not be abandoned. Force them to return to their proper place. The proposal was approved unanimously. For the first time in galactic history, the major powers would unite their military forces for a single purpose. They would remind humanity who was really in charge. It was the worst decision they had ever made. Far away. On Earth, intelligence officers intercepted and decoded the Council's military communications. The information was passed up the chain of command until it reached Admiral Christopher Lane, commander of Earth's home fleet. Christopher read the reports carefully. 3,000 ships. The largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Coming to force humanity back into servitude, he smiled, though there was no humor in it. They still don't understand, he said to his flag captain, a woman named Nancy Drew. They think this is about numbers. Nancy studied the tactical displays. Our fleet is outnumbered 15-1, sir. Numbers aren't everything, Captain. We've been preparing for this possibility for a very long time. He turned to face her. Signal all commands. Operation Welcome is now active. It's time to show the galaxy what humanity can really do. The joint fleet assembled at the edge of human space, a gathering of warships so vast that it blotted out the stars. 3,000 vessels from a dozen species, carrying weapons that could crack planets and crews that numbered in the millions. The Volanthi contributed their massive dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small moon. The Karathi sent their swift attack cruisers built for speed and precision. The Dranathi provided their heavily armored battleships. Designed to absorb punishment and keep fighting, Fleet Admiral Vezarak commanded from the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Light. He was confident of victory. How could he not be? The numbers were overwhelming. Human space contained perhaps 200 combat-capable vessels. They would be crushed beneath the weight of Council firepower. Begin the advance, the Sarek ordered. Broadcast the surrender demand. A message went out on all frequencies, translated into the human language called English. Attention, Earth forces. You are surrounded and outmatched. Surrender immediately and return to your proper place in the Galaxy Council. Resistance will be met with total destruction. You have 1 hour to respond. The response came in less than a minute. A single human ship appeared at the edge of sensor range, small and alone against the endless fleet. It broadcast a brief message in a calm, clear voice. Should have been kinder. Then the ship vanished, jumping too faster than light speed before anyone could react. This RX scales turned the color of confusion. What does that mean? Is that their surrender? His tactical officer, a young Volanthi named Korith, studied his displays with growing alarm. Admiral, I'm detecting energy signatures throughout the system. Hidden platforms. Thousands of them. Possible. Our scouts surveyed this region. There was nothing here. The scouts were wrong, sir. Space began to light up. Automated weapons platforms, concealed in asteroid fields and hidden behind dead moons, powered up and revealed themselves. They had been placed over centuries. A secret defense network that no one outside humanity had known existed. Each platform bristled with weapons that the Council had never seen before. The human fleet arrived next. 200 ships, just as intelligence had predicted. They formed up in a defensive formation, small against the Council armada. But something was different about them. Their energy signatures were strange, fluctuating in patterns that Council sensors could not interpret. Admiral Christopher Lane stood on the bridge of his flagship. The Morning Star, Around him, his crew moved with calm efficiency. They had trained for this moment. They had prepared for years. Now it was time to show the galaxy what that preparation had achieved. "All ships, engage at will," Christopher said. "Platforms, fire on priority targets. Let's teach them a lesson they'll never forget." The battle began. The first wave of Council ships charged forward, confident in their numbers. They expected the human ships to retreat to try to preserve themselves against impossible odds. Instead, the human vessels accelerated directly toward them. The lead Valanthi dreadnought fired its main weapons. Beams of concentrated energy that could slice through anything known to galactic science. The beams struck the leading human ship and dispersed. Harmlessly against its shields, the Valanthi captain had 3 seconds to wonder how this was possible before human. Weapons returned fire. Beams of light, far brighter and more focused than anything the Council possessed, cut through the dreadnought's armor like it was made of paper. The massive ship exploded in a flash that temporarily blinded nearby vessels. Across the battlefield, similar scenes repeated themselves. Council weapons struck human shields and failed to penetrate. Human weapons struck Council ships and destroyed them instantly. The automated platforms added their fire, targeting engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. The Karathi attack cruisers tried to use their speed advantage, swooping in from unexpected angles. But human targeting systems tracked them effortlessly, predicting their movements and placing shots exactly where they would be. One by one, the cruisers went dark. Systems disabled by weapons that left crews alive, but ships helpless. The Drenathi battleships lived up to their reputation for toughness, absorbing hit after hit without being destroyed, but their return fire did nothing. They could take punishment, but they could not give it. Eventually, they too went silent, overwhelmed by damage that accumulated faster than their repair systems could handle. Admiral Thesserek watched his fleet die around him. His scales had gone pale gray, the color of shock and despair. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "We had 3,000 ships," Sir Korath said, his voice trembling. "We've lost contact with over 2,000 vessels. Most are disabled, not destroyed. The humans are specifically targeting propulsion and weapons while leaving life support intact. They're not killing our crews? No, sir. They're capturing them." On the Morning Star, Captain Nancy Drew reported the same thing to Admiral Christopher. "Enemy fleet combat effectiveness is down to 12%, sir. We've disabled most of their capital ships. Our casualties are 0. Christopher nodded. He felt no joy in this victory. These were not truly enemies. They were foolish neighbors who had pushed too hard and now learned the consequences. Signal the surrender demand. Tell them we're willing to accept their withdrawal. Their crews will be returned to Council space unharmed. Their ships will be dismantled. Sir, some of the enemy commanders are requesting permission to speak with you directly. Deny all requests." They had their chance to talk. 300 years of chances. Now they can listen. The battle, if it could be called that, ended 14 minutes after it began. The greatest fleet in galactic history lay scattered and broken. Its surviving crews, it's waiting for human ships to collect them and send them home in disgrace. The Sarek sat alone on his darkened bridge, the eternal light drifting powerless through space. He had been so certain of victory. The Council had been so certain. They had looked at the numbers and seen an easy win. They had never considered that numbers meant nothing against an enemy with superior technology, superior training, and 3 centuries of grievances to settle. A human shuttle docked with his ship an hour later. The crew that boarded was professional and polite. They treated the Valanthi prisoners with respect, providing medical care for the wounded and food for the hungry. They were, in every way, the ideal example of civilized behavior that, somehow, made it worse. "You could have killed us all," the Sarek said to the human officer who processed his surrender. The officer, a young man with kind eyes and a gentle voice, nodded. "Yes, we could have. We chose not to." "Why?" The officer was quiet for a moment. "Because we're not like you. We never were. You saw servants when you looked at us? We saw potential friends. We hoped that one day you would see us the same way." He shook his head sadly. "You never did. But that doesn't mean we have to become what you expected." The Serac had no response. He was escorted to a holding area where he would wait until transport could be arranged. Around him, the other Valanthi prisoners sat in stunned silence, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. News of the defeat traveled faster than light, spreading through the galaxy in hours. Species that had considered joining the attack suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. Governments that had secretly hoped the Council would put humanity back in its place began distancing themselves from the whole affair. On Earth, crowds gathered in the streets, not to celebrate, but to mourn. They mourned the relationship that might have been. They mourned the friends they had hoped to find among the stars. They mourned the future that the Council's arrogance had destroyed. President. Laura Bennett addressed the planet that night. Her words were brief and heavy with sadness. "We did not want this. We never wanted this. But we will not apologize for defending ourselves. We will not apologize for refusing to be slaves. The Council chose this path. Now they must live with the consequences." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "To all the species watching, let this be a lesson. Kindness is not weakness. Generosity is not surrender. And humanity will never again bow to those who treat us with contempt." The galaxy listened. And for the first time in 3 centuries, the galaxy was afraid. 2 years after Earth's withdrawal from the Galaxy Council, the universe had become a very different place. The old order had crumbled. The great powers that had once dominated galactic politics now struggled to survive. And in the silence left by humanity's absence, chaos had filled the void. The Valanthi Empire, once the most powerful force in known space, existed only in name. Without human technology to maintain their infrastructure, their great cities had begun to fail. Power shortages led to food shortages. Food shortages led to riots. Riots led to revolution. The empire that had stood for 10,000 years now fractured into dozens of competing factions, each claiming to be the legitimate government. The Korathi were worse off. Their floating cities had crashed into the acid seas below, killing millions. The survivors clung to whatever high ground they could find, building primitive shelters and struggling to grow food in soil that had been toxic for centuries. Their once proud civilization had been reduced to scattered bands of refugees. Fighting over scraps, the Dranathi had torn themselves apart in civil war. 3 factions claimed authority, each one blaming the others for the disaster that had befallen them. Their military, once feared across the galaxy, now spent its strength fighting itself rather than external enemies. And through it all, the Galaxy Council continued to meet, though its sessions had become exercises in futility. The delegates still gathered in the great chamber on Valanthos Prime. The chamber was dark now, lit only by emergency lighting. The floating platforms that had once carried hundreds of species now held only a few dozen representatives, and those grew fewer with each passing month. On Earth, life had improved in ways that surprised even the most optimistic planners. Resources once sent to ungrateful allies now benefited human colonies. Technology once shared freely now advanced human civilization alone. The population was growing. The economy was booming. For the first time in centuries, humanity was investing in itself. Secretary of State Margaret Price met with President Laura L. Bennett in the presidential office overlooking New Washington. The walls were covered with screens showing news feeds from across human space, all of them positive. New colonies founded. New technologies developed. New achievements unlocked. The latest reports from the border, Margaret said, placing a tablet on the desk. 27 formal apologies from Council species this week. 43 offers of alliance. 18 unconditional surrenders. Laura picked up the tablet and scrolled through the messages. Her expression remained neutral, but Margaret knew her well enough to see the weariness behind her eyes. Leading humanity through its greatest crisis had aged her more than any number of years. "What are they offering?" Laura asked. "The Valanthi are willing to give us 3 star systems if we'll help rebuild their economy." The Karathi are proposing to make humanity permanent chair of a reformed council. The Dranathi. Margaret paused. The Dranathi are begging us to mediate their civil war. They're willing to accept whatever terms we set. And in exchange, we go back to how things were. Human doctors healing their sick. Human engineers building their cities. Human soldiers defending their borders. Margaret's voice carried a hint of bitterness. They want us to be the galaxy's servants again. They're just offering better titles this time. Laura set down the tablet. Decline them all? All of them? Even the Karathi offer. Permanent council chair is significant. It's a cage with golden bars, Margaret. We'd still be doing all the work while they take all the credit. We'd still be giving everything and receiving nothing but pretty words. Laura shook her head. No. We left because they wouldn't treat us as equals. Coming back as their leaders wouldn't solve anything. It would just make us what they were. Margaret nodded slowly. She had expected this answer, but part of her had hoped for something different. It would have been satisfying, in a petty way, to rule over those who had once looked down on them. But Laura was right. That wasn't who humanity wanted to be. Meanwhile, in a small office in the diplomatic wing of Earth's government complex, a young man named Peter Walsh was doing something unusual. He was reading requests from species that no one in the council had ever cared about. The Thasani, whose agricultural world had suffered so badly from the irrigation failures, had sent a simple message. They apologized for nothing because they had done nothing wrong. They had always treated human visitors with respect. They had always paid fair prices for human goods. They had simply been caught in a disaster not of their making. They asked for nothing except the chance to trade again. They had food. Humanity had technology. Perhaps an arrangement could be reached that benefited both sides. Peter found similar messages from other species. The Irilith, A.S. Mall race that the old council had nearly driven to extinction through neglect. The Canary, whose homeworld sat on the fringes of known space, far from council politics. The Vesic, whose culture valued honor and fair dealing above all else. These were not the species that had wronged humanity. They were victims of the same system that had treated humans as servants. They had no leverage, no threats, no grand offers. They simply wanted a chance to be friends. Peter brought his findings to Secretary Price. These aren't the powers that hurt us, he explained, spreading the messages across her desk. They were stepped on by the council, too. The Irilith lost 3 colony worlds because the council decided their territory would make a good buffer zone. The Canary had been denied full membership for 2 centuries because the Velanthi thought they were too primitive. The Vesic were almost wiped out in a war the council could have prevented but chose to ignore. Margaret studied the messages with growing interest. What are you suggesting? Maybe we don't have to choose between isolation and exploitation. Maybe there's a third path. Peter leaned forward, his eyes bright with possibility. What if we built something new? Not a council where the strong rule the weak, but a partnership where everyone contributes equally. Where we help each other because we want to, not because we have to. The species you're describing are small. They have little to offer us. They have honesty. They have integrity. They have values that actually match ours. Peter shook his head. The big powers offered us wealth and influence. These species are offering something more valuable. They're offering genuine friendship. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. She thought about everything humanity had suffered under the council. She thought about the battle that had shown the galaxy human strength. She thought about the chaos that had followed. The millions who had died because the old order could not survive without humanity's support. And she thought about what kind of future humanity wanted to build. Write up a proposal, she finally said. I'll bring it to the president. Peter grinned, the first genuine smile Margaret had seen in the diplomatic wing since the withdrawal. Yes, ma'am. On the border of human space, Commander Gregory Barnes received new orders. After 2 years of turning away every ship that approached, he was now instructed to allow certain vessels through. Small ships from small species. Carrying diplomats rather than demands, Lieutenant Patricia Cole reviewed the list of approved visitors. Sir, these are mostly species I've never even heard of. The Thasani, the Irilith, the Canary. Gregory nodded. They're the ones who never treated us badly. Command thinks it's time to see if we can make friends instead of enemies. After everything that's happened, can we really trust anyone out there? Gregory watched a small Dasoni transport approach the border, running lights blinking in the standard diplomatic pattern. I don't know, Lieutenant. But I know we can't stay isolated forever. And if we're going to take a chance on someone, better to start with the ones who never gave us a reason to hate them. He opened a channel to the approaching ship. Dasani vessel, this is Commander Barnes of the Earth Border Fleet. You are cleared to proceed. Welcome to human space. The response came back in heavily accented but understandable English. Thank you, Commander. We hope this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Gregory smiled despite himself. So do we, this is vessel. So do we. The first step toward a new future had been taken. 5 years had passed since Ambassador Daniel Hughes placed his council pin on the podium and walked away. In that time, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The old powers had faded into shadows of their former glory. The Galaxy Council existed only in history books, and in their place, something new and wonderful had grown. The Human Cooperative Alliance held its annual assembly on Harmony Station, a massive structure that floated in the space between 3 star systems. The station had been built through the combined efforts of 30 species working together as genuine partners, each contributing what they could and receiving what they needed. It was, in many ways, a monument to everything the old council had failed to be. President Laura Bennett, now in her second term, stood at the central podium and looked out at the assembled delegates. She saw the Sani agricultural experts sitting beside human engineers. She saw Irilith scientists sharing data with Kinneri researchers. She saw Vesic warriors standing guard alongside human soldiers. Brothers in arms who had chosen to protect each other. 5 years ago, Laura began, humanity stood alone against a galaxy that had treated us with contempt. We had 2 choices: submit to injustice or walk away from everything we had built. We chose to walk away. She paused, letting her gaze travel across the diverse assembly. Many predicted that we would fail. They said humanity could not survive without the Council's protection. They said we were too small, too weak, too primitive to stand on our own. A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the audience. The idea seemed absurd now. They were wrong, Laura continued. We did not merely survive. We thrived. But more importantly, we discovered something we had almost forgotten. We discovered that we were not alone. Throughout the galaxy, there were others who shared our values. Others who believed in fairness and equality. Others who had been crushed by the same system that had tried to crush us. She gestured to the delegates around her. The Human Cooperative Alliance was built on a simple principle: strength through partnership, not domination. Every member species has an equal voice, regardless of size or power. Every trade agreement benefits both parties. Every defensive pact is honored, not because law demands it, but because we choose to stand together. In the audience, Ambassador Daniel Hughes watched with pride. Katie Morrison, now his wife, sat beside him, her hand in his. They had come so far from that terrible day in the council chamber. So far from the moment when Daniel had given up everything he had worked for and walked away. Do you think they finally understand? Katie whispered. Daniel looked at the assembly. He saw former enemies sitting as friends. He saw species that had once been ignored, now leading important initiatives. He saw a future being built on foundations of respect and mutual benefit. Some of them, he replied quietly. The ones that matter. After the formal session ended, the delegates mingled in the Great Hall. The Sani farmers discussed crop yields with human agricultural scientists. Irilith doctors compared notes with human medical researchers. Everywhere Daniel looked, he saw cooperation and genuine friendship. A Vesic warrior approached him. A tall being with 4 arms and skin like polished stone. His name was Korath, and he commanded the Vesic contribution to the Alliance defense fleet. Ambassador Hughes, Korath said, his voice a deep rumble. I wanted to thank you personally. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Thank me? For what? For showing us that there was another way. Korath's stone face somehow conveyed emotion despite its rigid features. The Thessic have a saying, "A warrior's true strength is measured not by the enemies he defeats, but by the friends he protects." Your people showed us that this was possible on a galactic scale. For that, we are forever grateful. Daniel shook the offered hand, feeling the rough texture of Thessic's skin. We didn't do it alone, Commander. We just showed everyone what was possible. You and the others made it real. Across the hall, Secretary of State Margaret Price was deep in conversation with the Arilith representative. A small being with luminous eyes and delicate limbs. They were discussing the latest expansion proposals, new species who wanted to join the Alliance. The requests keep growing, Margaret said, reviewing her tablet. We've received applications from 47 species this month alone. Some of them are former council members. The Arilith representative made a chirping sound that translated as thoughtful concern. The former council powers seek to join us. This seems problematic. Some of them are sincere. They've seen what we've built, and they want to be part of it. Others. Margaret shrugged. Others are just desperate. They see the Alliance thriving while they struggle, and they want the benefits without accepting the principles. How will you decide? The same way we decide everything. We'll look at their actions, not their words. If they're willing to treat others as equals, they're welcome. If they just want to use us the way they used humanity before, they can stay outside. The Arilith chirped again, this time with approval. This is wise. The old council accepted anyone who had power. They cared nothing for character. You are building something different. We're trying, Margaret said. We're definitely trying. Outside the station, ships from dozens of species patrolled together. Human vessels flew alongside the Sani transports, Arilith research ships, Canary scouts. They were not an Empire's fleet, enforcing obedience through fear. They were partners, protecting each other because they had chosen to be family, in the darkness beyond Alliance space. The remnants of the old council powers watched. The Velanthi fragments still fought among themselves, unable to unite even in common cause. The Korathi survivors struggled to rebuild, humbled by the loss of everything they had once taken for granted. The Dranathi factions had finally stopped fighting, if only because they had nothing left to fight over. Some of them looked at the Alliance with hatred, seeing the success they had thrown away through their own arrogance. Some looked with jealousy, wanting what they could not have. Some looked with despair, knowing that they had destroyed any chance of being welcomed into this new order. But a few, the wisest among them, looked with hope. They saw that the Alliance was not exclusive. They saw that species who proved their commitment to equality and fairness were welcomed. They saw that even former enemies could become friends if they were willing to change, on a small, struggling Velanthi world. A young leader named Thessala gathered her followers and proposed something radical. They would renounce the old ways. They would commit to treating all species as equals. They would apply to the Alliance not as the proud Velanthi Empire, but as humble partners seeking a new path. It would take years. It would require proving themselves through actions, not words. Many of the other Velanthi fragments would mock them, calling them traitors to their heritage. But the Sala had seen where the old heritage led. She had seen the ruins of cities that had once touched the sky. She had seen the graves of millions who died because their leaders were too proud to accept help from those they considered inferior. She chose a different path. The first Velanthi ship to approach Alliance space with genuine intentions of partnership arrived 3 months later. It was small and battered, carrying supplies for trade rather than weapons for war. Commander Gregory Barnes, still patrolling the border after all these years, received the transmission personally.
Alliance.
Border Command. This is the Velanthi vessel, New Dawn. We come in peace, seeking friendship. We have renounced the ways of our ancestors. We wish only to trade fairly and live honestly. Will you grant us passage? Gregory studied the ship on his sensors. It was pathetically small, nothing like the mighty dreadnoughts that had once challenged humanity. Its crew numbered perhaps 20, and its cargo holds contained simple goods. Nothing valuable or strategic, but its name was New Dawn, and its message was one of hope. Gregory opened the channel. Volanthi vessel, New Dawn. This is Commander Barnes. Your reputation precedes you. We've heard about what the Solace people are trying to build. There was a long pause before the response came. We do not expect forgiveness, Commander. We know what our kind did to yours. We ask only for a chance to prove that we can be better. Gregory thought about the past 5 years. He thought about the battles he had fought, the ships he had turned away, the hope he had seen, growing where despair once ruled. He thought about the Alliance, and what it stood for, and what it meant to offer second chances to those who truly sought them. New Dawn, you are cleared to proceed. Welcome to Alliance space. He paused, then added, welcome home. The small Volanthi ship crossed the border, the first of its kind to be admitted in 5 years. Behind it, scattered across the galaxy, others watched and wondered. Perhaps they thought there was hope for them too. The old universe, built on hierarchy and exploitation, had died. A new one, built on equality and mutual respect, was being born. And at its heart stood humanity, no longer servants, no longer masters, but partners in the greatest adventure the cosmos had ever known. The stars, once cold and distant, now felt like home. Not just for humanity, but for all who chose to walk the path of friendship and honor. The galaxy had finally learned the lesson that Earth had tried to teach for 300 years. Kindness was not weakness. Generosity was not surrender. And together, reaching out in trust rather than grasping in fear, they could build something beautiful. The story of humanity and the galaxy was not ending. It was only beginning.